I will start now. Welcome everyone to this webinar of Agora Energiewende. It's the 8th online event actually since we started 9th of April, and we're very happy that you will join us today. Agora Energiewende is an independent think tank funded by two foundations. The majority of our staff is based in Berlin. A few are also in China, Brussels, and Austria. And we are some 45 colleagues altogether. Today's webinar will be on the speeding up the energy transition in Korea. And on the podium, we do have my colleague Mentari Pujantoro, who is Project Manager International Energy Transitions at the Team International of Agora Energiewende. We have also Pil-Sok Kwon, who's Director of the Research Team of GESI, which is the Green Energy Strategy Institute in Seoul, Korea. And we have Janne Gerlach, who's a trainee at the Communications Department of Agora Energiewende. I am Nicola Bock, I'm Head of Events at Agora Energiewende. And now, what's going to happen during the next hour? We will have a presentation of Mentari and Pil-Sok for some 25 to 30 minutes. And then we will have another around 15 to 20 minutes for your questions to be answered. Now, how can we interact? Since we cannot see you, unfortunately, it would be lovely to do so, but yeah, we can't. But there are still ways of getting in touch with us. First of all, you find that on the, let me just double check. You find the chat button on the bottom left of your screen. This you can use for any technical issues you might face during the webinar. So in case you cannot hear us anymore, you can't see or anything, put your comments in there. We will try to take care of it, and the other members of the audience will not see it. We will also use the chat in order to inform you about relevant links or email addresses, because we have already uploaded the presentation, which Mentari and Pil-Sok will present in a couple of minutes, to our website, so you can download it there. We also put some contact email addresses in the chat window, and we will be communicating a few more links in the chat window for you. Now, for your content-related questions, you have another window on the bottom right of your screen, which is Q&A or F&A for Fragen und Antworten, if you have it in German. These you can put in there. The questions that you pose there will not be visible to the audience until we pick them. And this is Janne's job today, to have a look at all the incoming questions and then pick the ones which deem most interesting to most of us. So once we've picked it, it will become visible to the audience, just so that you know. Which brings me to the next point. We are recording this webinar as usual because I think it's a good opportunity to either rewatch it or watch it if you do not have the time right now. So in case you do not want your name anywhere in the internet, you should refrain from posing questions in the Q&A section, because as I just mentioned, they may become visible to the audience. So yeah, unfortunately, that's the deal. Right, okay. That's everything for the housekeeping. Before starting with the presentation, we would love to find out a bit more about you, because we're curious how many people are in the webinar from the different continents, and also what your professional background is. So we do have prepared a poll, and I will call it now, and you will be able to see it in a second, and I will read it to you. You should see it on your screen now, and you can already start voting. The first one is about your professional background. A, energy industry. B, policy or government. C, finance, economy. D, non-energy related. So just click what you feel you belong to. The second question is, I come from A, Korea. B, Asia, other, so non-Korea. C, Germany, D, Europe other, and E, other parts of the world. And I think there's still some movement, so I will give it another 3 seconds to make sure that everyone was able to vote. Okay, I will finish it, and now you will be able to see the results. So as we can see, we do have a majority of people with the energy industry background, closely followed by people with a policy government background. We have, so this was energy industry was 45% and policy government 40%. And the rest, the remaining 15% are 9% non-energy related and 6% finance economy. Regarding from where you're coming from, we have a majority from Germany, 40%, followed by 28% of other European countries. And then we have 15% from Korea, 11% from Asia, and 6% from other parts of the world. So I hope this will help Mentari and PILSOC to picture, to get an idea about who's watching. And I will hand over to you, Mentari.
Thank you, Nicola, and good morning to our listeners in European time zone. So basically around 57% of the listeners coming from Europe, but still importantly from Korea as well, 17%. So happy to hear that you can join us, especially at this hour. And thank you also for joining us in this webinar called Accelerating Energy Transition in South Korea. And I mean, primarily South Korea has been in the international spotlight these days, not only because of response for the corona crisis situation, but also due to the political scene. There is a latest manifesto from several political parties in South Korea who has mentioned about the Green New Deal. And this is also absolutely a hot topic as well in Europe and also North America. And since last year, as you know, I think Agora is primarily working in advancing energy transition in Germany, also in Europe. But since last year, we have been working with GESI to advance energy transition in South Korea. So I'm very happy to have Pil-Sok Kwon here, the director of the Green Energy Strategy Institute, and also an expert in long-term energy scenarios. So in the next 30 minutes, him and we will present the findings from the alternative Korean power scenarios for the next 10 years. And this is in relation to also, for example, carbon pricing, phasing out of coal power plants, as well as expanding renewables, and how all of these measures can reduce greenhouse gas emission in South Korea, and also hopefully pave the way to net zero. So Pil-Sok, if you can help me sharing the slide of the presentation. Yeah, perfect. So before maybe some of you, before we deep dive into the presentation of Pil-Sok, it would be nice maybe to also briefly discuss about several key contexts of the Korean power system. So in the next maybe 5 to 10 minutes, I will present Korean power sector. Let me see if I can move the screen. Ah, yeah, there it is. Oops, a little bit too fast. Sorry, Pil-Sok, could you scroll to the beginning, please? One more. to the beginning, sorry. To the first slide. Yeah, okay, perfect. So I will start. Hopefully it worked nicely. Okay, nice. So I mean, having also German audience here, I think it would be nice to also compare a little bit Germany and Korean power system. So both countries, as you can see from the slides, have quite a considerable amount of coal, although Germany has committed to coal phase out. So maybe a couple of years ago, Germany also having 42% of power coming from coal. And then the second is nuclear is also quite similar condition, although also nuclear in Germany is set to be reduced until 2022. And while in Korea, this is still the only low carbon energy source. And however, there's still quite differences in terms of solar and wind. In Germany, it's already to 27% of generation. And in South Korea, it's still below 3% of the total power generation. So the next slide. Yeah, moving to the consumption part. Energy consumption in South Korea has been growing in the past 20 years. It's quite special compared to the other OECD countries like Germany, for example. If we look at the electricity consumption, it has doubled in the past 15 years with annual growth rate of initially around 5%. And then in the recent past year, it's around 2%. And I think it's quite notable to mention that the Korean energy consumption is still growing and it's above the OECD average. As you can see here, the red line is Korea and then those small dots is the OECD average. And electricity accounts for around 19% of the total energy consumption. And unfortunately, they're still dominated by fossil fuels. You can see a lot of percentage coming from oil, 29% coal in the primary energy supply, and also some percentage of gas. And also, as I already mentioned before, similar in electricity generation, still very small percentage coming from solar and wind. And okay, oops, sorry, the control is today a little bit weird. Pilsok, maybe could you help me moving the slide to slide, yes, this one, thank you. The slide 6, please. Yeah, perfect. As I mentioned before, the solar and wind capacity is still quite small. Up to now, it's around 9.3 gigawatts of solar PV and 1 gigawatt of wind. It's important also to know that as an industrial country, Korea has a notable solar PV market. They are also module producer. The largest is Hanwha Q-Cell with annual production capacity of 4 gigawatts roundabouts. And yeah, unfortunately, there's still a small number if we compare it to the other countries, OECD like Germany, who already has total solar of wind 100 gigawatt. And the government are targeting, or this is the called 30-20 target, 20% of generation coming from renewables by 2030. So this means 37 gigawatt of solar PV, 14 gigawatt of offshore wind, and 4 gigawatt of onshore wind. There are still very small numbers of utility scale projects compared to maybe what happened in the other world, in the other parts of the world. So this is, I think, one of the key homework for the Koreans to increase the utility scale project as well. There are several announced of 2.1 gigawatt of floating solar project and 3 gigawatt of ground mounted PV array. And obviously there are several challenges of installing renewables in Korea. We can discuss it later, but at least the expectation is that this will increase along with the decreasing global cost. Next, please. Yeah, so here you can see the development of the emission in Korea from the 90s. And the emission of South Korea have more than doubled since the 90s. And the country has some of the fastest growing level in the OECD as well. The emission from the energy sector, this is the red color, is 87% of total. And from those 87%, 55% or half of it coming from industry. And in 2014, this is the Copenhagen Accord, I think the government has target to reduce the emission 30% from business as usual in 2020. However, already at 2018, the emission level is already at 720. So this is obvious, very obvious that the target will not be reached. And in terms of Paris Agreement, the government, and so this is becoming the latest target, plan to reduce the greenhouse gas emission in 2030 by 37% below business as usual. So this is mean 536 million tons CO2 for the energy sector and 237 million tons CO2 for the electricity sector. It is cited by several organizations that this is still not in line with the below 2 degrees or below 1.5 degrees target. Next, please. As I mentioned, there's still some challenges for the decarbonizing South Korea energy sector, and this is primarily means installing renewables. So one is from the land use and public acceptance part. I think it's clear for everybody that Korea has limited land use availability, but there is also issues due to the project sitting regulation, quite a complex permitting process, and the regulation is cited by many developers to be not so in line. There's also surprisingly negative perception towards solar PV. So this is also quite special, I think, compared to the other countries. And the second headlines on the challenges is obviously on power market and pricing of the renewables. In the RPS, this is the renewable portfolio system of the Korean, there is still both non-renewables as well as renewables. So in a way, it's subsidizing both energy at the same time. And there's not so many incentives to lower the cost for renewables due to the inefficiency of the system. And also in terms of the power market, there is still not yet a short-term or real-time power market to send signal to the developer. And then the last one on the technicality of grid, there's still a slow grid expansion as well as considerable shares of flexible power generation. So there's a lot of still coal and nuclear power plant. So hopefully with this background information, especially on the power sector, it gives you a lot of context for our next presentation. So with this, I will hand over to Pilsok, who will present the findings and how these findings can hopefully address the challenges in decarbonizing South Korea.
Can you hear that? Can you hear me? Okay. So thank you for mentoring. It's a great introduction of my country. And my name is Pil-seok Kwon. I'm very happy to announce make a presentation for our study. So our study is done by GESI, which is our institution. For some people who do not know GESI, our institution, I will introduce my institution very briefly. We are located in the Seoul, Korea, and we have 5 members working for our institution. And our research topic is energy scenario analysis with a modeling step. And we also studied about some public acceptance of the renewable energy sources. It's quite difficult these days in South Korea. There are a lot of NIMBY situation of opposing against the PV and wind power. So we are researching 2 subjects mainly. And this study is done by us and then finished by last year. Then let me start with the motivation for this study. As mentally explained, the government target of 2030, it's not everybody will agree with that. It's not ambitious at all. So we want to have some different emission target. So that's why we are having some alternative scenario to reduce the CO2 emission. Our emission target in this study is to find some scenario to below 100 million ton of CO2 by 2030, which is less than by 40% of the current status from the power sector CO2 emission. And it is also 36% below the government target of the 2030. So as mentally say, we are investigating the strategy to reduce CO2 emission. First one is the increasing of the CO2 pricing. And second one is to define the schedule of the phasing out coal power capacity. And then last one is the renewable energy expansion. I will start with the introduction of our model. So for quantitative scenario analysis, we need a model. So we built on our own model. Then the feature of our model are listed in the left side of the PowerPoint slide. And I would like to make emphasis on this model is hourly model. It's because as you might know that Korea is an isolated electric system. So which means that it does not have any electricity grid connected to other country. So that's why we are very careful to the value of the security of supply and then grid stability. So this model is made use of linear optimization technique. And additional feature is that this model can calculate the greenhouse gas emission and the curtailment. And this model, the time horizon of this model is 2030, just 10 years later from now. So we do not assume very, sophisticated, flexible means like a sector coupling, such as power to heat, power to vehicle, or power to gas. We do not assume such a high sophisticated technology, and we just assume the pumped hydro for energy storage in our model. I will talk about the scenario framework. As I explained that we have three main scenario measures, but each scenario measure have some specific step. For example, CO2 pricing scenario, we incrementally increase the CO2 pricing from 0 to 100,000 Korean won per CO2 ton. So there are many European audience here. So if I convert it into the euro currency of euro, then it is around 80 euro per CO2 ton. And then with the interval of the 8 euro per CO2 ton. So we incrementally increasing from 0 to 80 euros by step of the 8 euros per CO2 ton. And there is another scenario strategy, which is reduce the retirement schedule, face the retirement schedule of the coal power generation. So there are 4 steps, 4 layers. The first layer is government plan, and second layer is 30 years for retirement schedule, 25 years and 20 years of retirement schedule. Currently, we are building 77.2 gigawatt of coal power plant under construction in South Korea. So I think it's quite a significant impact on our analysis. So I also investigated this impact as a sub-scenarios. And there is and then we still have some possibility expand the renewable energy sources more than beyond the government target. So we also have a scenario for the renewable energy expansion. Next slide. So there are so many scenarios. I counted that it is around more than 100 scenarios. So I will make a short, and I will make a presentation, very important finding for you because of lack of time. The first scenario measure, which is to increase the CO2 pricing. And to the left, there is a figure then, it is the generation share change by increasing CO2 pricing. From 0, if there is no CO2 pricing and environmental cost, then we will have 45% of the coal generation share. Then if we increase at the highest level of the CO2 pricing, and the coal generation share would be 8%, which is quite a big reduction, even with that big reduction. But this scenario cannot achieve our emission goal, which is the 150 million CO2 ton. At the same time, it brings a lot of total cost up. It increased the total cost very significantly. So this model is not that economically competitive one. The second scenario is to retire coal power plant with a shortened schedule. So we try to reduce the coal power plant schedule into 30 years, 25 years, and 20 years. And then we can calculate when is the final phase out year if we follow this lifespan of the coal power plant. Then if we follow the 30 years lifespan, then final phase out year of the coal power plant would be 2052. At the best case, we have 2042 for the phase out year of the coal power plant. So this scenario has some benefit. We can reduce our coal generation share by 22% without any external cost. But however, the emission level is 186 million CO2 ton. So it is beyond our emission target. As I say, we have a sub-scenarios for switching 7 gigawatt core power plant, which is under construction now. Then if we have a big decision to cancel this project and change it into the natural gas power plant, then we have some two good things. I can see that the final phase out year can be reduced into around 5 years or 6 years. And if we look at the right table, then you can see that the blue color area, which is the beyond the 150 million ton of CO2, then you can see that more number of the scenarios can achieve our emission target. So we also expand our renewable energy sources, renewable energy sources, which can be integrated our power system. Then competitive of the renewable energy sources can be enhanced as more external costs are internalized. And then at the highest level of the CO2 pricing, the renewable capacity can be increased around 92 gigawatts, 42 gigawatts of PV and 50 gigawatts of the wind. And the generation share is approximately 32%. Compared to our government plan for the renewable energy sources, which is a very big increase. So as a result, we can decrease our CO2 emission level into 90 million CO2 ton. As I said, the number of scenarios we have is quite big, so I want to more comprehensive way of our scenario result. If we look at the figure, then first two figures to the left is the scenario with only one individual scenario measure to reduce the CO2 emission. The first one is the CO2 pricing, and second one is the early retirement of coal power plant. Then those two scenarios cannot achieve the emission target, as I explained. And then if we combined these two scenario measures, you can see that there is some scenarios can achieve our emission target. And to the right, which is the linear expansion scenarios with the CO2 pricing, then it can decrease CO2 emission quite a lot. So then I would like to emphasize that renewable expansion provides more feasible scenarios reaching emission target with a low cost. If we look at to the left figures, then you can see that CO2 pricing level with around 40 euro per CO2 ton, then all of the scenarios can achieve emission target. And if we look at the right slide, the figure, then firstly, I would like to some guide to read these figures. The x-axis is the cost thing. So from the to the further right, then which means that the cost is increasing, and to the further y-axis there is an emission level. Then the color has some scenario groups. The green color means the renewable energy expansion scenarios. And then orange color scenario group is in the case of the 7.2 gigawatt coal power plant can be changed into the natural gas. And the blue one and the purple color group is the others. So we can very big difference between the scenario among the scenario group, and then renewable energy scenario is 20% economical than the other scenarios in order to achieve our CO2 emission target. So to sum up, we have four main scenarios, four main messages for that. The first message is that basically our government emission target is not ambitious at all. So it is almost the same emission target, status, current status of emission will be in the 2030, 10 years later, which is so not ambitious. And the second message is that increasing of the renewable energy sources in our power system around the 30%. It is always good measure to reduce CO2 emission. But in order to operate, in order to be fully effective, it should be combined with other scenario measures, like increase of CO2 emission price, and then early retirement of a coal power plant. And then I think that it is quite important the Korea government should announce when is the when is the last year of the coal power plant. Then the investor can get those signals as seriously, and then they will stop investing the coal power plant. Also, there are some coal power plant operator would like to retrofit their power plant, but I think then if the Korea government give a very clear signal, and they will not do such a thing for the futures. And another message is that as some of you know that we already have a emission trading scheme in Korea electricity market, and the level of the CO2 pricing is quite high, around the 20 euros per CO2 ton. But the cost is not applied into some dispatch order of our power market. So there are a lot of loophole to avoid such a CO2 pricing. So we should amend such a institutional such an institution for the future. And then let's talk about the Green New Deal things. So the last month, if we divide the political parties in South Korea into two groups, the one group is the very favorable toward the energy transition, and the other group is very unfavorable toward the energy transition. If we divide these two groups, then last month's election result is very good news. But however, so far, I did not hear any concrete plan announced by government. But it is a parliament election, so we should have some patience to wait for another next some months. And I hope that before the election, all the party for the favorable toward the energy transition, they already made us some promise. So this table shows that what promise they already made. So I hope that those party, the ruling party especially, would like to. I want to ruling party keep abide by their promise before the election. Thank you. It is my, yeah, I just prepared until here. And then I think it's that my scenario analysis is quite complicated, and there are many scenarios, and then there are a lot of assumptions I made, but due to the lack of time, I did not kindly explain everything. So you can question some model issues and the scenario issues, and then I will try to answer as far as I can. Thank you.
Right. And I will quickly take over from here because taking into account the results and findings of the study, we are curious about what should be the priority for South Korea in decarbonizing its energy sector. And we are curious about your opinion. So I will start another poll before I hand over for the last slide to Mentari. And you should be able to see it on your screen right now. So the question, what should be the priority for South Korea in decarbonizing its energy sector? Answer number 1 is expand solar and wind by at least 30% of total generation. 2, phase out coal power plants before 2035. 3, implement efficient carbon pricing, minimum 50,000 Korean won, which equals around 40 euro. 4, green hydrogen society. 5, all of them. And 6, none of them. And I can see people are still voting, and it takes a little longer, obviously, than the questions we had at the beginning of the presentation. Let's wait some more time to make sure that the ones who are still thinking can also vote. Right. It looks like everyone did a vote, so I will make it visible to you. Oops, pardon, not yet, but you can see it now. Right, yeah, exactly. So there's a clear majority for answer number 5, all of them. So 49% voted for that, followed by implement efficient carbon pricing. 23% of you think this should be the priority. Then we have with 13% expand solar and wind by at least 30% of total generation. Then 10% went for phase out coal power plants before 2035. And then we have 3% with green hydrogen society and 3% none of them. So someone is obviously not very optimistic. Right, I will hand back to Mentari.
Thank you, Nicola. Would be interested to hear from 3% or maybe 1%, is it? What would be another ideas also to improve decarbonizing effort of Korean power sector, but very happy that a lot of people agreed with several measures that we have been proposing. So what's coming next, at least in our horizon, there's a mention about the Green New Deal, latest presentation from PILSOC. I would like to also give a little bit of head up that we, GESI, since end of last year, has started analysis of deep decarbonization of South Korea 2050. Hopefully, this will be finalized this year, and it's definitely, I think, a good timing also with the latest pledge from the political party in South Korea. And the second is a webinar. So our European head of European cooperation will also have a webinar with the Korean Energy Information Agency in the 20th of February on the Green New Deal. So he will present some perspective on the European side, and there's some people also from Korea who will give some perspective from the Korean side. I think this will be a very interesting one as well. Okay, I think that's so far from my side. Let's move to questions and answer.
Yes, thank you very much for your questions so far in the Q&A section. So if you have more questions, please post them there. We try to answer as many as possible. And let's start right away with the question from Rena Kuvata. Why is demand growing in Korea? And another one, maybe on the more methodology side, how do you ever evaluate grid stability with hourly time series? Pilsok, do you want to answer this?
But I think that the Korea economy is still strong. At the same time, today I make a presentation for the power sector only. The biggest the concern is that for our power system is that very low level of the electricity. So that's why nobody care of the energy efficiency measures. So our demands is a very highly growing these days. And the second question is that in our hourly time series model, so then I made some special constraint that if there is some variable renewable energy at certain hour, then I will try to back up. I will try to put some backup plant should be on. But it is not the unit commitment model. So I just calculate with the sum of the natural gas power plant and the hydro pump, pumped hydro that is still on, counterpart to the renewable energy production. Then I think that it is fine for the grid stability. Definitely, we have some limitation for evaluating grid stability issues in this model because we are just using the linear optimization.
And Tari, did you want to add something to this?
Not on the modeling part, but maybe on the demand part that Rena has mentioned. Why is it still growing? As Pilsok already mentioned about, there is still small energy efficiency effort, but it's also quite worth noting, I think, about the structure of the consumption as well, because from the energy, the whole energy, 50% are industry, and industry, Korea basically is keeping its manufacturing capacity in the country, right? Although maybe have some factory outside, but this is, I think, quite special maybe compared to, let's say, Japan in terms of the structure. So this may also explain the growing demand as well.
Okay, then we have another question from Andreas Becker for you, Tari. You wanted to answer about the acceptance of renewables, that you have mentioned that there's a negative perception of renewables among South Koreans. And Andreas asked if you could elaborate a bit more on this. Is the country already running into acceptance issues?
Yeah, I think this is also what is worth noting, because mostly in terms of NIMBY or not in my backyard, it's normally happen to wind energy, right? And this in South Korea, there's several information that there's a false information on the harmfulness of the solar PV, on health effects or fire or something like this. And this may increase the resistance from the community, let's say. So I think there's a lot of effort from energy agency or civil organizations to debunk this myth.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Martin Made. He asked if Korea is relying on capacity auctions in order to increase the share of renewables, or does the national strategy plan to do so? And if so, what is the estimated amount of financial support for renewables, say until 2030? So a bit more on political targets for the energy transition in South Korea. Pilsok, maybe you have some answers to that.
Yeah, that's a very tough answer. Tough question to answer. So I think the capacity auction is just started right now, and then I definitely had no idea from the government side, what is the estimated amount of the financial support for renewable. It's basically I don't know. I'm sorry for that.
Okay, so then let's try with another one about political, the political program for renewables. Raffaele Piria asked that the program you presented are looking more or less progressive on energy and climate, and if you can say anything about other parties and the general politics in Korea.
Okay, so beside the three political parties I introduced, the other party are very, conservative toward the energy transition. For example, they still support the nuclear power, and then sometimes they have a very advertising. They say very bad things about the renewable energy expansion. So they are very, still they are very entangled with some nuclear power, coalition.
Okay, Gokse Mete ask, what do you think is needed to drive the energy transition forward? Are there any industry leadership advocating for emission reductions? Mentari, would you elaborate on this?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very good question, and we are asking ourselves as well what is needed in terms of driving the energy transition forward, because there's a lot of challenges coming from different sides. Like one is the land use, and then yeah, for renewable expansion, I think this is one of the key aspects, and how this expansion of renewables can be reached, especially with the current situation, limited land availability, and still there's also cost issues. For example, that the cost of solar maybe is still not as low as in other parts of the world, and inefficiency of the renewable portfolio system, and so on and so forth. And I think from the government perspective, there are some efforts also, I think, to be in the industrial leadership, for example, with this hydrogen society, as well as, right, at least this mention about in the political scene, the manifesto on the Green New Deal is already a good sign. The homework is how this can be derivated to the regulation or the law. And this is, I think, what the social organizations are expecting in the next month.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions you would like to answer because you think they are important? Pilsok, do you want to start?
I would like to answer Martin Beckenkamp. And then his question is that globally, new investment into fossil generation are not cost competitive with the renewable, but why does it seem that this trend is not seen in South Korea? I think that the South Korea is a very crowded country. So there are very small available land. At the same time, that's why investors or installer should persuade the local resident, and then for doing this, the additional cost will be occurred. And but why the fossil fuel generator or nuclear power generator, I call it the conventional generator, has a very big benefit. Used to have a very big benefit from the government. So at the time, the government can just provide land area for the building the fossil fuel power generator. So that's why there must be some cost competitiveness from the government support.
Mentari, is there a question you want to pick, or should I look for another one?
Still reading, but maybe Pilsok, you want to mention something about the auction on quota of the, what is it, emission trading system?
Yes. Yeah, right. It's a Korea emission trading system has some kind of the CO2 pricing, but however, this cost is not reflected into their real cost of the generating of the electricity, which means that there are a lot of loopholes I already mentioned in the presentation. But first thing is that generation company does not pay for the ETS, RTS, the CO2 pricing, and then a lot of free allowance would be given to the generation company. So the portion of the paid CO2 price is a very small portion for the generator. That's why it does not reflect into the power market properly.
Yeah, absolutely. So this inefficiency that I mentioned before happened in the emission trading system in South Korea, which is maybe very important to note. This is the second biggest trading system after the European one. So it's very important. But there's also a lot of learning also from the EU ETS, for example, that it's a reform that needs to be done, and this in EU already happened. So maybe this is also something to look forward to also in Korea, how this can be more efficient and be reflected in the merit order of the power system. And yeah, maybe there's a bigger question to ask, if it's a trading system or is it carbon tax system that has been mentioned in the manifesto. So we will see.
Okay, I think we're running out of time here. If there's not a very urgent matter you want to stress or answer, I think we got to stop here and yes, hand over to Nicola.
Yeah.
Thanks for all of your questions and for the discussions.
Yes, thank you also from my side for the presentation, Mentari and Pilsok, and for sorting out the questions, Janne, and to the audience for attending and joining us up to now. If any further questions come up to your mind, just use the email addresses that were communicated through the chat and send them to us afterwards. That's no problem. Okay, right. So before finishing the advertising block at the end, we will continue with our webinar series. We'll have a webinar on Thursday. That's going to be in German on the double booster, a program bringing together climate. Well, what's the English?
Stimulus.
Klimaschutz, climate. Saving the climate and pushing. Oh my God! I didn't actually prepare this. I just wanted to mention the English-speaking webinar, and this is where it brings you. So, check it up on the website. It's going to take place on Thursday. And we will have another English webinar next Tuesday at 11:30 this time. This is going to be about de-risking renewables in Southeast Europe. And the presentation of this webinar can already be found, as we said, on our website. The recording of the webinar will be on the website at some stage beginning of next week, I would say, maybe even at the end of this week. And if you want to be kept up to date on our upcoming events and also studies we release, you may want to register for our newsletter if you're not yet on the mailing list. And I believe Janne just mentioned that, put the link into the chat. So thanks for attending. Have a good day. Stay healthy. Keep the distance still, please. And see you next time. Bye.